On Earth, the dust remains attached to objects thanks to the humidity of the air. On the Moon, however, there is no atmosphere, and therefore there is no humidity. Theoretically, lunar dust should not be able to stick to any particular surface. Looking at the images from the Apollo missions, though, we have dozens of situations in which the lunar dust sticks everywhere. That happens mostly on the astronauts' suits, with dust sticking not only to the lower part of their legs, but also to the arms, trunk, and even the backpacks. Often it's the astronauts themselves who notice the amount of dust that sticks to them.
I am covered from head to foot with dust. Yeah, we got some work to do here, boy. They're all dirty. You ought to see you back. I couldn't have gotten any dirtier than you.
From Houston Center, someone has noticed the problem as well.
Looks like you guys have been playing in a coal bin.
Dust inexplicably sticks to the surface of the cameras and their lenses, too. The astronauts often complain about this.
We ought to check the dust on the lens on these cameras.
Sometimes the problem is so serious that they can't even read the settings.
So much dust on the camera, it's hard to read the settings.
Same problem for the television cameras used by the astronauts. In this case, we notice several speckles of dust that are stuck to the camera lens. Here instead, the entire lens is covered by dust. The lighter spots are the only areas of the lens not covered by dust. Sometimes the astronauts realize this by themselves.
I think we need to dust the TV lens. It's pretty dusty.
In other cases, the request to clean the lens comes directly from the control center.
Troops, before we leave this area, we want you to brush the LCRU and the TV camera lens.
These images, shot on Earth, show dust particles that stick to the lens because of humidity. Why does the same happen on the lens used by the astronauts, given that there is no humidity on the Moon? Also, the gnomon. This color chart used by the astronauts simply refuses to stay clean.
Radar gnomon's pretty dirty, unfortunately, Joe. Just no way to keep that color chart clean with all this dust.
Roger.
It's not just the astronauts' suits and instruments that get covered with dust. For example, look at the lunar rover with the frame and the engine protections fully covered with dust. Or the fenders from the rover, with dust sticking on the inside of the wheels and on the outside as well. Some debunkers have suggested that all this dust may stick to objects because of some kind of electrostatic effect. But this explanation is not plausible for at least two reasons. First of all, we're talking about completely different materials from one another. The astronaut suits, the photo cameras, the surface of the lunar rover, the lenses from the TV cameras. Secondly, NASA itself excludes this possibility when they explain that an electrostatic effect can possibly take place in the shadow areas of the Moon. But in the areas hit by sunlight, this effect is instantly dissipated by the solar wind. From this NASA document, which studies the electrostatic charges on the surface of the Moon, we can read, "In the photoelectron-dominated daylight plasma region, the charge dissipates almost instantly in all cases. Thus, charging on the lunar day side is not an issue." Furthermore, in some cases, more than dust, we seem to be looking at actual mud. Look, for example, at this wheel from the lunar rover. Or this other image from the wheel of the rover, with the rim that seems completely covered in mud. It's as if we were looking at a muddy wheel from an all-terrain vehicle down on Earth. There's also another, even more puzzling example. This is a thermal degradation experiment conducted during the Apollo 14 mission. How could the sand have compacted itself enough to appear like mud in a moistureless environment? There is also another detail worth mentioning. These metal plates have a series of letters and numbers engraved on their surface. Subsequently, these letters and numbers have filled up with sand. But how can the sand preserve the shape of the number once dislodged from the original place where it was formed? Here, for example, we can see the number 5, which has kept its shape even after being dislodged from the engraving. And here is the number 3, also keeping its shape after it was dislodged. How can the sand keep the original shape after having been dislodged from the engraving if we are truly in a moistureless environment? Possibly the biggest problem of all is the one posed by the footprints that the astronauts allegedly left on the surface of the moon. Wherever they go, the astronauts leave very sharp footprints on the ground. But how is it possible for lunar dust to remain so hardly compacted, to the point of maintaining the shape of the boot, being that there is no atmosphere on the moon and therefore there is no humidity? We know that in order to give sand a specific shape, it is necessary to wet it first. If the sand is dry, the sand grains won't stick to each other and the shape will not be preserved. The debunkers, however, maintain that lunar dust, which is called regolith, is much sharper than the sand on Earth. For this reason, they argue, the simple pressure from the boot is enough to compact it, even in total absence of moisture. In order to prove that theory, the Mythbusters have asked NASA for an exact replica of the moon boot and for a certain amount of a special dust prepared by NASA, which has very similar characteristics to lunar dust.
So for this test, NASA has given us a lunar regolith simulant.
It's manufactured to test equipment that is going to the moon. It's very similar to lunar dust in the fact that each particle is very sharp. Dirt on Earth has been weathered, so it's very smooth. So this is as close to lunar dust as we can get.
It's one kind of dust that Paolo Attivissimo is also very familiar with.
Questo è un campione, è un simulante, si chiama, un simulante di regolite, che è la polvere di luna sintetica che si usa per collaudare i veicoli che poi torneranno sulla Luna.
The Mythbusters have conducted their experiment in a vacuum chamber, in the total absence of moisture, thus replicating the same conditions found on the moon.
The rig is ready to take its one-legged step, and the vacuum chamber has been vacuumed.
Boot stop, vacuum. Here we go. In 3, 2...
We notice that the Mythbusters have even added some counterweights to their device in order to simulate the exact weight of the astronaut's foot on the lunar soil.
1.
Yeah! Take that!
Yeah! Look at that. We made a footprint inside of a vacuum.
And there was no water vapor, which is what this conspiracy theory is all about.
In your face, conspiracy theorist!
The Mythbusters seem very eager to celebrate, but in reality they have not succeeded at all in replicating the original footprints by the astronauts. Just look at how solid and squared the little bars of sand that have formed under the astronauts' boot are. They are almost perfect geometric solids, with sharp edges and well-defined contours. These sandbars are so solid and compacted that they even retain their shape after they are broken in pieces. It's as if we were looking at a clay model that has later dried up in the sun. It is clear that we are looking at a very different result from the one obtained by the Mythbusters in the vacuum chamber. If we were to break apart or even just try to move one of these sandbars, they would certainly not remain compacted, nor would they retain their shape. In conclusion, the Mythbusters, with their experiment, have proven the exact opposite of what they intended to prove. In absence of humidity, it's absolutely impossible to replicate the astronauts' footprints. Question: given that there is no moisture on the moon and that the solar wind dissipates electrostatic charges almost instantly, can you explain why the lunar dust sticks to all kinds of materials, from the astronaut suits to the photo cameras, from the rover's surfaces to the TV camera lenses? Can you explain how the rover's wheels can gather so much thick dirt on them as to look like they're covered in mud? Can you explain how the lunar dust can stick together to such an extent, even preserving the shape of the numbers after they were moved from the engravings in which they had formed? Given that the Mythbusters have replicated the lunar conditions under vacuum and with the sand simulant, can you explain why they were unable to reproduce the astronauts' footprints from the original photos?
We'll start with one of the most, if not the most, damaging evidence that the moon missions were not shot on the moon, but right here on Earth. This is a close-up of the Apollo 17 flag. We've all been told that there's no atmosphere on the moon, and therefore there could not be any moisture, right? Then why is the flag wet? You can see it is drying from the edges in. Additional photos in this series will reveal other areas of moisture and even standing water.
Infamous Apollo 17 flag up there. That particular image has been viewed by millions of people a year over the last 45 years. It's up on walls, probably 10 or 12 feet high. It's photographed in books and magazines and everywhere else. And of course, it's the American symbol as well, your very reverent symbol. And everybody that has analyzed and studied this photo in any way, shape, or form has never looked at it and seen that it's wet.
Yeah.
It quite clearly is.
That is amazing, because it absolutely is. You can see along here where the arrows are, the line between the dry and the wet part of the flag, and of course it's very obvious over here. It's even crinkled up, almost like it just came out of a washing machine or a rainstorm.
It's in the red and white as well. It's harder to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you see almost in the center, in the close-up part there, on the first full band down, just the bottom half of the red is actually water as well on that. Right in the section there.
There and here, yep.
Yeah, you can see it if you study it. The harder you study it, the more you see it. And of course, when you realize that it's wet, and it was raining, the entire set is wet.
And that kind of goes back to when it comes to this conspiracy, right? There's many schools of thought. Was this all shot in a studio, in a Hollywood basement? But, when you start looking at some of the other evidence here that Scott's uncovered, where you've got standing water on some of the equipment, you've got mold growing, and you've got a wet flag, just to name a few, it's clear that this was shot outside and over a long period of time, where the weather and the elements, took its toll on the equipment and the props and everything that was involved.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the other photographs associated with this particular flag, which are the two astronauts standing beside it, being shot, beside it, that shot there, you can see the mud on them. Well, when you look at the whole series through, these guys are just picking up mud and putting it on each other's suits. Okay, and then of course there they've washed it off for the shot, and you can see that the suit's still wet. And that's Harrison Smith in that particular photograph. It says Cernan. Paul, myself, and Marcus Allen are the only ones that know the difference on who's who on it, and we left it up there to see if anybody would even notice which astronaut is which. I mean, most people can only name one or two astronauts that landed on the moon. So the difference between the two in the Apollo 17 really doesn't make any difference who that is. Both of them are covered in mud. Both of them are showing off that it's a fraud. And they're just basically a couple of boys having fun with some very expensive toys.
Yep. Yeah, that is absolutely amazing. Yeah, there's no way that I could ever tell. Obviously I know Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, Tom Hanks, those astronauts, but
yeah. Well, the commander.
Don't forget bacon.
The commander has the red stripe on his suit. All except Neil Armstrong. He was the commander. He doesn't have a red stripe on his suit, but the rest of them, the commander has a red stripe, and the Lunar Module pilot doesn't.
First one, let me zoom it in a little bit. But this one, it's very obvious, especially along here, that this is wet through and through. It's very obvious that this is wet.
Oh, yeah, I do see it. Yep. Yeah, I couldn't get a good view of it before. Yeah.
And a couple other shots as well where you can see that it appears that something has gotten wet, some of the equipment, and then it has dried and has left, what it looks like is mud that has dried. And there was a shot that you had there earlier, Bob.
Yeah, I'm going to find it
there.
And that was equipment that was used over and over again, for all of these, what I think was used over and over again based on this analysis. And the deterioration of the equipment over time is obvious because of the weather.
Absolutely. And the one, I think it's in this one, I may not have that other one, but it is one of these that shows the water.
And it is near the bottom. And I can't, Scott, what is this? This
Right
is it.
there.
Just past it.
Oops, I did.
Well, those two there, one's showing mold. On the left-hand side of that, where the left arrow is, you can see where it's like it's foil, so everything is wrinkled except that one spot there. It's absolutely perfectly flat, so there's water lying in it. And then on the other arrow, you can see where the water is dried back. There's actually green mold around the outside of it, and the mud's caked onto it. And that's exactly what happens when water evaporates. Those aren't little pictures. Those aren't even blown up. Those are the actual pictures, the way they are. And I don't know why anybody looking through there couldn't see that. I mean, if you take a piece of tinfoil and rip it off and set it on your barbecue and take a picture of it, it's going to look pretty clean. And that's exactly what they were doing. When they set this equipment up, they took the photograph right away of it. It's not like it was laying around. And this stuff was supposed to be prepared in a clean room.
Yeah, now this to me looks like, you've got like leftovers from water here. You see this? Looks like
it's so wet.
Yeah.
So if you look at the backdrop, the so-called mountain, in this, when you're going through the Apollo 17 photos, as the ground in front dries out, then it starts to match the backdrop. So when you go back two or three magazines further on, they'll match up in color.
Yeah.
But when
this is so blatantly different.
Darker in color. And that's why the footprints are so much darker as well. And it's the same as if you were walking in sand or anything else, right?
Yeah.
Or any dirt, when you kick it up, it's darker underneath as it starts to dry on top. Yeah. That particular photograph, they must have been shooting quite a few golf balls around, because there's quite a number of them out there on that set.
Yeah, there's a ton of them. The other thing that strikes me, of course, is right along the little plus marks here where the Hasselblad has the plus marks, you can clearly see this bifurcation mark in between the foreground and the background. That, I mean, it is so obvious that they are so blatantly different that how anybody could not look at that and go, come on, really? I mean, it's not even a good blending job. They didn't even try.
Well, because it rained. They would have had the ground closer. Like, if the ground wasn't wet, it's much closer match.
Yeah, but in this case it was wet, so it made it a little bit darker.
That's right. And if you go through 2 or 3 magazines later, then this particular same spot is much lighter. It's much closer to the background as it dries out.
Yeah. Yeah, not surprising. And of course, then we have mud on the wheels from the rover, which I thought was pretty crazy. And, and then earlier, the mud on the suit. So I'm just curious, Scott, if, when you show people, like, for example, the mud on the spacesuits that we were looking at earlier, what do they say when they look at that? I mean, what excuse do they make when you're saying, look, there's the mud right there on the spacesuit? Let me get to this. Whoops, there it was. When they look at this, what excuse do they have for that? Do they just say, well, it's just regular dirt, or what?
I haven't heard anybody tell me that it's anything other than just dirt that is sticking to the suit, static or whatever is causing it.
Moon dirt, man.
Why doesn't the whole suit get like that? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, especially as often as they fall or they're down on their knees or whatever. But I mean, this is so obvious that this is mud. I mean, this is absolutely positively mud. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. And then you can see, of course, over here where they've washed it off, it's still wet. They didn't even try to hide any of that. And, we know that everything that goes up into space is pristine clean, in the first place. And yeah, of course, you're going to get some dirt on it from the moon or soot, but this is mud, and there should be absolutely no water, because in the shade it would be ice, and in the sun it would evaporate instantly. So there is no excuse for obviously any water being up there whatsoever. And yet the flag is soaked with it. There's mud all over his suit. How can anybody buy this? It's beyond me.
Well, I mean, the astronauts are showing this off. They deliberately put that mud up on that sleeve and took that picture, and everybody thinks, oh, they're on the moon. They're not. They're just a couple of guys having fun in the mud, showing off a wet flag. And if you realize that it rained, everything is wet.
Yep. So here we are back at the flag again. Of course, this is very, very apparent that it's wet, especially along the top. You can see it running down here.
Yeah, just through this over and over again. That just seems to be. It was just such a blatant, a piece of evidence that we decided, let's put this in every video, at least one shot of it, just to remind folks that, this is almost blatant. Anybody all should have been pulled out. There's no way that this stuff should be even existing like we talked about.
And somebody told me it was dust blowing in the wind, that it wasn't moisture. And I said, it doesn't matter which it is. It can't be there.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
No, absolutely should not be there.
Can't be there. Yeah, and like these are just going through the various shots where there is water to be seen. Right, and once you see, like, there's not just one or two photos in each one. There's a whole series of them, right? And you can just, like, there's thousands of photos to go through, right? Each one has its own story to tell.
Yeah.
You put them all together, you got a big book.
Yeah. You know what they say, space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Flagstaff landfill.
Yes. In this particular picture, buried in the report server of NASA, when I was reading through the many thousands and thousands of PDFs, pressure test done on the CSM blew that window out. And you can see that they just duct taped it back together. They put a rain guard on it. That rain guard is broken. And of course the seal's gone because the water is in between the two layers of glass, and it's been in there long enough to peel the paint up.
Duct tape fixes anything.
The official version of that photograph with the water running down in zero gravity, of course, is halfway to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay, it's minus 250 outside and the water doesn't freeze.
Magic.
Amazing. Magic.
Amazing piece of glass. How many years can you look at that and not see what it is?
Exactly.
Like, there's water laying right there. You can actually see where he wiped his finger across that. Right about where the arrow is.
Yeah, I see that.
Across. Okay. In the checklist, they're to photograph it, wipe their finger, and photograph it to show that there's no dirt on it anywhere except on that panoramic mirror.
Yeah, so what's up with that on the lower right-hand picture, and Paul just moved his thing, on the second arrow, Paul, there's this like area that is rising up in the corner there. What exactly is going on there? Yeah, that's it, Paul.
That's just the panel curled up.
Okay, just coming apart at the
And there's some plastic, whatever the coating is on it is peeling back.
Wow. I don't think this thing would make it as a homeless tweaker shelter, honestly. The homeless people would catch pneumonia and die. It's so bad. So bad. And of course NASA's excuse is well, it didn't have to be very durable because it had to be lightweight and all that stuff. But this is patently absurd. And the fact that you can see this water, and it is obvious that it's water. It's water. It's water on the lander here. It's water on the ground. You can see that. There's mud on their spacesuits. I mean, you're right. It rained. And that's the thing that really got me when you first said, well, this is basically in a landfill up by Flagstaff. I was thinking to myself, I thought all this stuff was shot inside on a studio set, but obviously not.
There's a nice shot of it. Just that's Apollo 12 as well. It rained in Apollo 12 and Apollo 17. That's where you're going to find the water.
Oh yeah, look at that on the right side.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. They didn't even bother to clean it up or anything. And why they would keep all that stuff outside at a landfill. And I mean, they must have really been counting heavily on the fact that they were making the TV station shoot second generation off of another screen to be able to conceal all that stuff. And that, you know, they were thinking, well, there's never going to be any good detail of any of this. Or maybe they were thinking, I don't know.
Director, like NASA has their own directors, right? They had the largest studios in the world. There's a good shot there. The astronauts had control of these cameras, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a film crew, not a director, not anybody. The astronauts themselves had control of these. They took them. They made sure that these photographs didn't disappear over time like all the rest of the documentation did. And somewhere along the line in 2015, they decided to release them back out.